Hey there. Tonight, we're heading up a chimney. It's 18th century London. The air thick with coal smoke and cold fog. You're a child. You work as a chimney sweep. No shoes, no safety, no choice. Just soot, bruises, and narrow brick tunnels. If that sounds relaxing, well, you're in the right place. Let me know in the comments where and when you're watching. And if you enjoy strange little corners of history to fall asleep to, please subscribe. It helps a lot more than Soot ever did. Now, let's start the day. Congratulations. You've just woken up in 18th century London. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? The air you're breathing could probably set off a smoke alarm. This is not the London of postcards. There is no Big Ben yet. No red buses. No royal guards politely ignoring tourists. Instead, it's a city wrapped in soot. Every chimney, every hearth, every little stove leaks smoke into the sky like the city itself is exhaling exhaustion. And you? You're part of that exhale. You're small, maybe 7, maybe 8 years old. No one's quite sure, not even you. Birth certificates aren't really a thing for children like you. Just a vague idea of how many winters you've survived. You work for a master sweep. A man who's too large to fit into chimneys, so he hires children. Tiny, nimble, and desperate enough to climb inside a house's lungs. Your day begins before the sun, because soot waits for no one. You sleep in a corner of your master's workshop, or maybe in a shed, or under a workbench. Your bed is a pile of rags, or nothing at all. The air is cold. You shiver into your clothes, which are not so much garments as layers of fabric held together by soot and hope. Breakfast? If you're lucky, a piece of bread hard enough to chip a tooth. If not, nothing until the work is done. Outside, the streets are already humming. Not with cheer, but with carts, hoofbeats, and the soft splat of something unmentionable landing in the gutter. The city smells like ash, smoke, and wet wool. But you're used to it. It's the smell of employment. And you are employed. Technically, there's no clock to punch. No wages to track. You work in soot, and your reward is not getting kicked. Or maybe, if you're especially lucky, a coin. Halfpenny if the lady of the house is feeling charitable. But don't get your hopes up. Hope doesn't pay for bread. The first house is always the worst. Not because of the chimney. Because of the cold. You carry your tools, a brush with a wooden rod, a soot cloth, a scraper, and a rope. Then comes the chimney. Some are wide and straight. Others twist like they were built by a drunken architect. You crawl in, breath held, you climb. The brick is rough. The soot is sticky. You press yourself upward using elbows, knees, and the friction of your own desperation. Coughing is part of the job. So is soot in your teeth. So is pretending you're not afraid. Because sometimes the chimney narrows suddenly. Sometimes it crumbles. And sometimes children get stuck. But not you. Not today. You emerge at the top, blackened head poking out like a bizarre flower blooming from a brick stem. You look around. The rooftops of London stretch out like a sea of crooked teeth. The city wheezes. You smile, soot and all. This is your view. And your reward? You get to do it all again. You don't own a clock. You wake when your master does. He's the kind of man whose boots never come fully clean, no matter how much he scrapes them. He wears a long soot-stained coat and carries a whistle made of brass, not for safety, for shouting. You call him sir. He calls you boy, or rat, or nothing at all. He's not cruel for sport, just for efficiency. He walks like someone who's always late. Not for an appointment, just late for getting paid. He smells of pipe smoke, sweat, and the faint sourness of ale left in a wooden cup overnight. He has a dozen children under his charge, and none of them are his. You and the other climbing boys. And sometimes girls are not exactly apprentices. You are cheap labor, disposable, replaceable. He feeds you when there's extra. He shelters you when it's raining. He teaches you exactly what you need to know to crawl through a chimney and not get stuck. And nothing more. He keeps a long pole, not for sweeping, but for reminding. 1 tap on the wall means hurry up. 2 taps mean climb faster. 3 taps mean stop making noise and keep crawling. You learn the taps before you learn how to write your name. At night, the climbing boys sleep where there's space, in the corner of the workshop, on piles of discarded cloth, or curled near the fire if they're lucky. The room is filled with chimney brushes, rope coils, and the ever-present scent of cold soot. The walls are marked with fingerprints, black smears from dozens of tiny hands. There is laughter sometimes. Quiet, quick, and usually cut short. Someone always coughs. Someone always cries in their sleep, and someone always waits the floor. But no one talks about that in the morning. Among the children, there's a hierarchy. Oldest gets first pick of bread. Smallest gets shoved into the narrowest flue. There's respect of a sort, but it's earned through endurance, not kindness. The toughest boy once climbed 5 chimneys in one day without a scrape. The youngest girl once got stuck halfway up and stayed silent the whole time, until someone pulled her out with a rope around her ankle. You learn not to speak unless it's important. You learn to listen for the signs, the shift of brick, the flutter of birds, the rattle of a loose pot in a hearth below. And above all, you learn not to fall asleep too deeply, because the master will wake you, and the day will begin again. Before the light comes, the cold arrives. It creeps through the cracks in the floorboards. It settles into the rags you sleep on. It pinches your toes, even when you curl them tight inside your shirt. You wake up in the dark, not because you're rested, but because the master's boots are already moving. You can hear the iron stove being stirred, but there's no warmth yet. Just the clang of metal and the shush of stiff cloth as he pulls on his coat. You sit up slowly. Your limbs ache like you spent the night inside a barrel. You probably did. No one speaks. Everyone moves like ghosts. Somewhere across the city, the first church bell rings. It's low and distant, a thick, echoing reminder that time is passing and work is waiting. For most Londoners, it means morning mass. For you, it means get up or get kicked. You wipe your eyes with the back of your sleeve, smearing soot into your skin like war paint. The fire, if there is one, is already dying. There is no time to stretch, no reason to linger. The master points. Chimney number 1. Let's go. Your clothes are already on, because you never took them off. A thin, patchy shirt. Wool trousers cut short to make climbing easier. A cap that was once brown, now a vague shade of chimney gray. Shoes? Only if you've earned them, and only if they haven't fallen apart yet. Most of the boys go barefoot. Calluses like bark, toes like ice. You grab your bundle of tools, rope, brush, cloth. You check your bag for the scraper, the one with the splintered handle. The master nods. He doesn't say good morning. That would be a waste of words. The door creaks open, and you step into the city. It's still mostly asleep, but already alive. Horses snort. A cart rolls past. A dog barks at nothing. The fog is thick, whole smoke mixed with damp river air. It clings to your lungs like a second skin. You smell yesterday's cooking fires, and the ever-present tang of wet soot. You know the first house by heart. It's always the same. Corner building, 3rd chimney from the back. The bricks are slick. The flue is narrow. And you haven't eaten yet. You enter the house through the tradesman's door, a side entrance that leads directly into the kitchen. The cook gives you a look, not unkind, just tired. She's seen sweeps before. She lifts the iron pot off the hearth. You nod. She nods. It's a routine. The hearth is still warm from last night's fire. Soot clings to the bricks like shadow. You kneel by the fireplace. You tie the soot cloth over your mouth. It helps a little, but not much. Then you crawl in. The flue opens above you. Black, narrow, uneven. A brick throat leading upward. You begin to climb. At first, there's room to move. You press your back against one wall, your knees against the other. You shimmy upward, inch by inch. The soot is thick, soft and dry at first, like ash. But as you go higher, it gets sticky, oily, cold in some places, warm in others. Your hands slide, your elbows scrape, the flue narrows. You exhale to squeeze through a turn. You hold your breath as dust rains down into your eyes. This chimney hasn't been swept in months, maybe longer. You scrape at the walls with the edge of your brush. Every stroke sends soot cascading downward. You feel it in your hair, on your teeth, behind your ears. There is no clean in this job, only cleaner than before. The light fades quickly as you climb. You can hear the street outside, faint hoofbeats, the clatter of a cart. But in here, it's silent, almost soft. You could be the only person in the world. Just you, the bricks, and the brush. You learn to listen to the flue. Cracks make a certain sound under pressure. Bends have an echo. You learn to feel your way by instinct. One hand forward, one knee braced, one hope that this chimney doesn't end in a dead end. You pause at a junction, a place where the shaft splits. You choose left, always left. It's wider by just an inch, and that inch might save you. You feel it before you see it. The shift in air, colder, moving, a draft from the outside world. You look up, and there it is, a crack of daylight, pale and yellow, like weak tea. But after the blackness of the flue, it's dazzling. You push yourself higher, ignoring the cramp in your side. The soot slides under your knees, but you hold. Finally, your head breaks the surface. The rooftop. You crawl out onto the slates, coughing, eyes blinking. Your face is a smear of blackened sweat, but you made it. You sit for a moment, breathing, watching the city puff its smoky breath into the sky. There's no applause, no reward, just another chimney waiting 2 doors down. You're allowed to stop, not because the day is over, but because your legs have started to shake. The master says rest while he talks to the next house. That means 5 minutes, maybe 7. You sit on the back step, elbows on your knees. Your shirt clings to your back, damp with sweat and dust. You wipe your face, but it doesn't help. The soot doesn't come off. It just moves around. You spit, a mouthful of black. You don't even flinch anymore. It's normal. Everything is soot. You are soot. Lunch isn't served. It's handed out. A heel of bread. Maybe a bit of cheese if someone remembered. Cold, stiff, crumbly. You chew slowly, not because it tastes good, but because it makes the moment last longer. Some sweeps carry a bit of meat wrapped in cloth, but it's rare. The lucky ones trade for apples. The unlucky ones eat what they find. Once, a boy ate a pigeon that had fallen from a rooftop. He said it was worth it. The master eats standing up. You don't speak to him unless spoken to. You drink from a shared tin cup, filled from a pump in the alley. The water tastes like iron and fog. But it's wet, and that's enough. Back at the workshop, there's a space where the soot is stored. It's a dark little shed behind the main door. No windows. One hook on the wall. A shovel in the corner. This is where the day's earnings go. Piles of soot, gathered from dozens of chimneys, dumped into burlap sacks, and stacked like coal. Soot is money, sold to brickmakers and farmers who mix it into soil or use it for fuel. You help empty the bags. It sticks to your arms. clings to your fingernails. You smell like the soot room for the rest of the day, and the next. Sometimes the youngest are made to sleep there, if the main room is full. They cough through the night, curled into corners, covered in a soft blanket of dust, but no one complains. It's warmer than the street. There are always more chimneys. But sometimes, for a brief hour, the streets fall quiet. You walk to the next house in silence, dodging puddles, stepping over stray dogs. You pass a bakery. The smell is torture. Fresh bread. Real bread. You catch your reflection in a shop window. A smear of a boy. Blackened face. Bare feet. Hollow eyes. No one notices you. Not really. You are part of the city, like the smoke. Present, useful, and invisible. There are safer ways to make a living. Sweeping chimneys is not one of them. You don't have armor. You don't have protection. You have a brush, a rope, and the hope that today's bricks don't give way. No one writes rules for children in chimneys. There are no safety drills. Only instincts, learned quickly or not at all. You know which chimneys lean to the left, which ones rattle when you climb, which houses haven't paid, and which might just collapse. But knowing is not the same as surviving. Inside a flue, everything that sits above you can fall. Bird nests baked into the mortar, old bricks weakened by years of fire, lumps of hardened soot the size of your fist. You can't see them coming. They drop without warning. They hit your back, your neck, your head. A boy once came down with a crack across his collarbone. He didn't cry. He couldn't. The breath had been knocked out of him like a bell. The master gave him vinegar and sent him back in. You learn not to ask questions after that. Not every hearth is cold when you arrive. Sometimes the fire was only just put out. Sometimes it wasn't, and the bricks bite. You don't scream. You shift your weight. You find the cooler stones and press forward. The worst burns aren't the ones that blister. They're the ones that heat your bones from the outside in. A chimney can hold warmth like a furnace long after the flames are gone. And in those moments, you are nothing more than another tool inside it. A moving part in a machine designed for heat. You climb anyway, because climbing is safer than hesitating. The soot doesn't just stick to your skin. It settles inside you. You breathe it. You taste it. You cough, and it comes out black. You wake coughing. You sleep coughing. And in between, your chest rattles like there's something loose inside it that won't come out. Older sweeps call it the wheeze. Some say it's harmless. Some say it never goes away. The master says it's part of the trade. Better to cough than starve. You try to believe him. But sometimes you see boys with gray eyes and sunken cheeks, still working, still climbing. And you wonder if one day you'll sound like them. You wonder if you already do. Every child in the trade knows the stories. Not the ones in books, the ones whispered on rooftops and around the cold stove when no one's watching. A boy too big sent into a flue too small. A chimney with a secret bend that no one warned about. A wall that shifted mid-climb. They got stuck. And stuck, in this line of work, means silence. Sometimes they break the wall to get you out. Sometimes they don't. You learn not to ask where certain boys went. You learn not to look too closely at the houses no one gets sent to anymore. The soot remembers. The bricks remember. And so do you. London doesn't just fill your lungs. It settles into your nose and stays there. You could walk blindfolded and still know exactly where you are, by scent alone. The streets are their own map. A map written in smells. Coal smoke, horse sweat, chimney ash, river mud. Tobacco curling from a pipe. Rotten cabbage water spilling from a tenement window. Every alley has its own odor, and every chimney boy becomes a quiet connoisseur, not by choice, by exposure, by necessity. There are no sewers. Not really. There are gutters. And that's where everything goes. The dishwater, the chamber pots, the spoiled food and bad milk, and things you don't even want to guess at. It all runs down the sides of the streets, puddling in corners, turning to sludge where the ground sinks low. You know to walk along the edges, never the center. Even when it's dry, there's a sheen on the stones, a gloss of old waste ground in soot and whatever was dumped from a window last night. In the morning, you might pass a fishmonger washing down his stall. The runoff mixes with ale, blood, and a week's worth of footprints. And that smell, sharp, fishy, faintly metallic, will follow you for blocks. Not all smells in London are bad. Sometimes you pass a bakery just as the ovens open. The smell of crust, golden and soft, drifts out like a secret. You close your eyes and walk slowly. Other times, a cart passes stacked with oranges or lavender sprigs, headed toward the richer districts. You breathe in greedily. It's not yours, but it's close. Then it fades, and the city rushes back in. You smell lye soap from the laundry yards, boiled leather from the tanners, the sour steam rising from brewery drains. These are the real perfumes of the street, unbottled, unwelcome, unavoidable. You can't smell yourself. Not really. But you know what others must smell when you pass. You see the way they wrinkle their noses, the way they step sideways without looking directly at you. You smell like soot, of course, but also sweat, damp wool, chimney grease, old bread, and iron. Your skin carries it. Your hair holds it. Your clothes are saturated. You bathe rarely, not because you don't want to, but because there's no time, no soap, and no warm water to spare. Even if you scrub it, the chimney would give it back to you by noon. You are not separate from the city. You are its smell, and the streets carry your scent, just as you carry theirs. You don't have much, but you do have the rooftops. When you climb out of a chimney and sit on the slates, London unfolds beneath you, gray and brown, twisted and smoking, but wide open. From up here, you can see over the narrow streets. You can watch the fog roll in from the river, like a slow wave. You don't feel rich, but you feel taller than the city. For a moment, that's enough. You stretch your legs carefully. Slate tiles are cold and slick. One wrong step and you slide. You've seen it happen. The master says don't look down, but you always do. The other sweeps are out too. You spot them on neighboring roofs. A boy crouched beside a chimney pot. A girl walking the ridge line like a tightrope. You don't speak, not with words. Up here, you signal. A raised brush, a wave, a nod. It's not friendship, it's recognition. You all live in the same airspace. You know each other by silhouette and soot. Some wear lucky ribbons. Some carry charms, a bone, a shell, a small brass button. There's a rhythm to the work, even across rooftops. You learn each other's pace. You hear the coughs echo from one house to the next. You know who's fast. You know who's tired. You know who didn't show up today. And you try not to wonder why. Chimneys carry sound. Sometimes, if you pause just before entering, you hear what's happening below. A baby fussing. A spoon scraping a pot. A man's voice low with anger. A woman's voice humming a song you don't recognize. You learn not to listen too hard. It makes you feel like an intruder, which, technically, you are. But the sounds stay with you. You think about the people who live in these rooms. You imagine the warmth of their fires, the softness of their chairs, the clean cloths on their tables. You wonder if they think about you, the child who climbed through their flue and vanished without a sound. They rarely do. But once, a girl brought you an apple. She left it by the hearth. You took it. You didn't say thank you, but you remembered. It feels free. This rooftop world. Open sky, wind on your face, the sun if it's showing. But it isn't really freedom. You're still working, still coughing, still cold, and the climb down is always harder than the way up. You sit for a moment longer. You let your boots hang over the edge. You press your soot-covered hands to the slate. You breathe in London, the chimneys, the coal, the bread, the sewage, the city that forgets you, even as you crawl through its walls. And then you climb back down. Your toolkit is simple. There are no gadgets, no clever machines, no shining metal gears. Just a brush, a rope, a scraper, and a soot cloth, each one worn, blackened, and strangely familiar in your hands. The brush is your main companion. Bristles stiff with use, often made from twigs, horsehair, or wire, twisted into a wooden handle. It's long enough to reach corners your arms can't, but not so long it gets stuck. You use it to scour the chimney walls, to scrape away layers of soot that cling like oil. Some brushes are tied to rods. Others are just pushed ahead of you as you climb, like a snowplow for ash. The scraper is the next tool, a flat piece of iron or wood, sometimes sharpened, sometimes dulled from too many bricks. You use it for the hard bits, the crusted soot that won't come loose. You angle it carefully, bracing your knees against the brick, tapping gently so the chimney doesn't crack. The scraper has no handle. You grip it with your fingers, even when they're stiff or bleeding. Some boys wrap cloth around theirs, but the cloth never stays long. Soot eats through everything eventually. Then there's the rope. Not a climbing rope, that's a luxury. This one is for lowering brushes, or sometimes for lowering you. If a flue is too steep or too slick, the master ties it around your waist and lowers you like a bucket. The rope burns your skin if it slides too fast. It cuts into your ribs if you twist. But it also saves you when your legs give out, when you've climbed too high and your breath is short. When you think you can't go any farther, the rope pulls you up, or lets you down. Finally, there's the soot cloth, a square of rough fabric you tie over your mouth and nose. It does little. Soot slips in around the edges. It coats your tongue. It dries your lips. But the cloth gives you a sense of boundary, a tiny shield between you and the chimney. Some sweeps decorate theirs with stitches or initials. Most are just plain rags, reused and blackened until the threads give way. These tools are not stored in a box. They hang from nails. They lie in piles. They travel with you, tucked into a satchel or tied to your belt. They are not clean. They are not shiny. But they are yours. You learn their weight, their quirks. You know when a brush is too soft or a scraper too dull. You notice when the rope frays, and you say nothing, because rope costs money. Brushes cost money. And the soot? It doesn't care what tool you use. It clings to all of them just the same. The sky dims slowly in London, like a coal fire losing its glow. Street lamps flicker to life, one by one, their yellow light barely pushing back the fog. You finish your last climb of the day with aching limbs and shoes filled with grit. Your fingers are scraped. Your knees are bruised. There's soot in your ears, your eyes, even under your tongue. You head back to the workshop in silence, too tired to speak. The master walks ahead, his boots clipping sharp against the cobblestones. The rest of you trail behind like shadows. Inside, the air is thick, not with warmth, but with leftover breath and stale smoke. A fire burns low in the grate, more ash than flame. You eat whatever is left, usually a heel of bread, maybe a piece of onion, or a splash of weak broth from a shared bowl. The boys sit close, not for company, but for heat. The youngest curls beside the fire, already half asleep. You lie down on a mat that smells of damp wool and chimney grease. The floor creaks beneath you. The ceiling above leaks. You pull your cap over your eyes and hope for a dream that isn't black. Some nights, you dream of climbing. Not the real kind, but endless chimneys that twist like snakes and never end. You wake coughing or shivering or both. The soot is in your lungs now. You breathe shallowly, not because you're scared, but because deep breaths hurt. You scratch at your skin, not from fleas, but from the way the soot settles under your clothes, making little fires on your shoulders and back. There's no washing, no clean sheets, just the dark and the sound of other boys turning over in their sleep. You hear the city settling outside. A dog barking once, and nothing. The river moaning against its banks. A carriage wheel squealing. Somewhere far away, a bell rings. You close your eyes and think about nothing. That's the trick. Don't think about tomorrow. Don't think about the climb. Just the darkness. Just the stillness. Just the moment between today and whatever comes next. You fall asleep smelling of soot. And you will wake up the same way. Your body keeps the score. Not in words or numbers, but in itches, scrapes, and spots you can't quite explain. You feel it in your fingertips, worn raw from scraping brick. You feel it in your back, twisted from too many chimneys, too many days curled into narrow flues. Some mornings you wake up stiff, but you don't dare say anything. Complaining doesn't stop the soot. It only slows the work, and no one gets paid for slowing down. Your skin tells its own story. A patch of rash on your arms, red and flaking, comes and goes with the seasons. It might be from the soot or the cold or the wool shirts you never wash. You scratch until it bleeds, then cover it with a sleeve and go back to work. The other boys have the same marks. Some wear them like badges. Others pretend not to notice. You learn not to ask. Every chimney leaves a mark, even the ones you climb without incident. But there's one mark no sweep can ignore: soot wart. It starts small, a hard bump on the scrotum or the inner thigh. You don't talk about it, not even to the other boys. But the master knows. He's seen it before. He pretends not to. The doctors have a name for it now, but no cure. They say it's from the soot, pushed deep into the skin, festering over time. Some boys go to the hospital. Some don't come back. You try not to think about it. You scrub harder in the wash basin. You hope it's just a boil. You tell yourself you're too young. You tell yourself it's nothing, but you check every morning, just in case. You get sick sometimes. Everyone does. A cough that won't leave. A fever that blurs your vision. Your limbs feel heavy, your breath short. But there's no rest. If you don't climb, someone else will. If you miss a day, you don't eat. If you miss two, you lose your spot. You wrap your scarf tighter and climb anyway. The master doesn't check your temperature. He checks your output. He asks how many chimneys, not how you feel. Your health is a tool. Use it, lose it, replace it. And yet, you keep going, because you have to. Because the chimneys don't wait. Because you know boys who stopped, and you haven't seen them since. You hear things, not from the master. He keeps quiet about the world beyond soot. But on the rooftops, in alleyways, from laundresses and coachmen and strangers with folded newspapers under their arms, you catch wind of something different. They say laws are being written. Laws about children. Laws about chimneys. Some say a man stood up in Parliament and talked about boys like you, small, blackened, bent from work. They say he brought a brush into the room and laid it on the floor like evidence. At first, you don't believe it. Laws are for people with boots, people who eat apples without worms, not for you. But the whispers grow. There's talk of machines, chimney cleaning contraptions made of rods and wheels, brushes that climb on their own. You picture it, a machine small enough to fit where you fit. One that never bleeds, never coughs, never falls. It sounds like a miracle. It also sounds like the end of your work. The master grumbles about it when he's had too much gin. Says the machines don't clean properly. Says boys are cheaper, easier, more reliable. You hear him curse lawmakers. You hear him say the law's been written before, and no one followed it then either. He's not worried. He says no one cares what happens inside a chimney. You wonder if he's right. But then one day, a constable visits the workshop. Just a glance inside, just a quiet word, and the master lowers his voice for the rest of the week. One of the older boys leaves. You don't know if he was fired or freed. Maybe he ran. Maybe he got too sick. But he's gone. And a new boy takes his place. Small, quiet, eyes wide with soot and fear. Just like you were once. You show him how to tie the rope, how to check the flue with a tap. You don't talk about the law, or the machines, or the men in Parliament. Not yet, but you think about them as you climb. You imagine a day when no one has to do what you do. And for a moment, a brief, breathless moment, that thought is enough to keep you going. Change didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in quietly, like fog rolling down a narrow street. One law passed, then another. Machines got better. Inspectors started showing up more often. But for a while, nothing truly changed for you. You still climbed. You still coughed. You still fit where brushes didn't, even after the rules said you shouldn't. But slowly, the chimneys began to empty. Some masters stopped taking new boys. Some stopped cleaning altogether. You heard about houses where no one climbed anymore, where rods were spun from below, where brushes were pushed with gears and handles. You didn't trust it at first. You couldn't imagine a chimney without a boy inside. When you got too big to climb, the master didn't need you. Maybe he let you go. Maybe you left first. You found other work. In a factory, perhaps, or on the docks. Maybe helping in a stable, or running errands through streets you once knew only from the rooftops. The labor didn't stop. The soot was just different. Some boys you knew didn't make it that far. The soot stayed in their lungs. The fevers didn't break. One by one, they disappeared. No farewell. No funeral. Just gone. A name you don't hear anymore. A spot in the workshop that no one fills. You keep moving. You grow. You carry the work with you. Sometimes you pass a house with a chimney pot and wonder if it was one you climbed. You look up at the slate roof and you almost feel your hands on the brick again. But you don't stop. There's no reason to. One day you hear that a chimney cleaning machine cleared a flue in half the time it used to take you. It doesn't feel like magic. It feels like forgetting. Like the world has moved on and left only the soot behind. The chimneys are still there. Some of them. Old brick stacks on slanted rooftops, long since sealed or forgotten. If you walk down certain streets in London, you can spot them, leaning slightly, chipped at the edges, patched with years of soot and rain. No smoke rises from them now, but you know what's inside. You remember. The job is gone. No one sends boys into flues anymore. The machines took over. The laws held. People moved on. And yet, pieces of your work still linger. In the hearths that haven't been lit in decades. In the black streaks that still hide behind wallpaper. In the odd iron tools that hang in museums, labeled with names you don't recognize. Sometimes, a tourist might ask about the sweeps. A guide might tell a story. A song might play, light and cheerful, about dancing on rooftops. But that version isn't yours. It's cleaner, softer. It skips the coughing. It skips the cold. It skips the long days you spent inside brick walls, invisible but essential. You don't blame them. No one wants to remember the worst parts. People like a good ending. They like a chimney sweep who sings, not one who limps. But the work doesn't vanish just because no one talks about it. It stays. In the flues, in your bones. In the way you still notice chimney pots before anything else. And every so often, Someone finds a tiny shoe or a child's cap bricked into an old wall, left behind in some forgotten flue, a piece of a life lived where no one was supposed to look. You hear about these discoveries. You nod. You know what it means. They finally found the place where someone like you got stuck. You're not a boy anymore. Your knees tell you that every morning. The stairs are slower now. The rooftops are distant. Sometimes you forget where you put your spectacles. But you never forget the chimneys. You never forget the climb. It comes back to you in quiet moments. When you pass an old brick house. When you smell wood smoke in winter. When your grandson asks why your fingers bend the way they do. You tell him it's from the cold, from the rope, from a time when children weren't meant to be seen, only sent. You don't talk about it much. There's no bitterness. Just dust, settled, still. But in your mind, you still see the flue. Still feel the bricks under your palms. Still hear the master's boots in the alley before dawn. The soot is long gone, but you remember the itch, the weight of it in your chest, the way it clung to your clothes, your skin, your thoughts. Sometimes you wonder how you made it out. So many didn't. You remember their faces, their coughs, the way they disappeared without a sound. You carry them with you, not in grief, exactly, but in acknowledgement. They were there. You were there. That was the world. Now people ask you questions. Historians, students, neighbors. They want to know what it was like. You smile, and you think for a long time before answering. You could tell them about the dark, about the cold, about the soot in your teeth. But instead, you tell them it was hard and quiet, and that sometimes it still follows you into sleep. You sit by the fire now, not to clean it, just to warm your hands. And as the flames flicker, you remember a time when fire meant work, not comfort. You close your eyes, and in the dance of shadows, you see yourself, small, barefoot, covered in soot, climbing into the chimney one more time. You don't climb anymore. You haven't in years. But your lungs remember. The cough comes in waves now, soft but deeper than before. The doctor calls it something long and clinical, but you already know the cause. You've known it for most of your life. It's the soot, the kind that never fully leaves, even after the baths, the clean air, the years. The room is quiet these days. You sit near the window, watching smoke curl from distant chimneys that no one climbs anymore. Machines hum. Streets bustle. Children walk past in shoes you could never have imagined owning. And you feel something strange, not regret, not sadness, just distance. Like the world has gently drifted beyond reach. Some nights you wake from dreams of narrow brick tunnels, your hands scraping the walls, the soot thick in your mouth. You lie still, feeling the weight of your chest. You know it won't be long now. The pain is sharper. The sleep is heavier. But you're not afraid. You think about the boys you knew, the ones who didn't grow old. Their names are fading now, even in your mind. But you hold on to their shapes, their laughter, the way they wiped their noses with soot-covered sleeves. They deserved more time. You all did. Outside, a breeze moves through the chimney pots. You hear it, not just wind, but something quieter beneath it, like footsteps, familiar, measured, as if someone small and nimble is still climbing, just out of sight. You breathe in, slowly, carefully, the way you were taught when the flue got tight. And as your eyes close, you feel the chimney again, not as a trap, not as a grave, but as a memory, a narrow place where you learned how to keep moving, no matter how dark it got. And now, at last, you rest. By the middle of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire had become a vast tapestry stretched across continents. Under the rule of Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, It had swallowed kingdoms, crossed deserts, and reshaped civilizations. From the steppes of Mongolia to the walled cities of China, the Mongols had proven themselves not just conquerors, but administrators and unifiers. Korea had bent the knee. China was slowly being drawn under the weight of Mongol rule. But across the eastern sea lay a land Kublai did not yet hold, an archipelago known as Zipangu in Marco Polo's writings: Japan. Kublai Khan did not begin with armies. In 1266, and again in 1268, he sent polite, carefully worded letters to the Japanese imperial court, urging cooperation and respect. The Mongol way was often more pragmatic than savage submitting peacefully could save a country from war. But Japan's military government, the Kamakura shogunate, never replied. To the Mongols, this silence was more than disrespect. It was defiance. Over the next several years, Kublai's ambitions grew sharper. In 1274, he ordered a military expedition, assembling what would be the first Mongol invasion fleet. The operation launched from the southern tip of the Korean peninsula. The exact size of the force is debated, but most estimates suggest roughly 30,000 to 40,000 troops from Mongol, Chinese, and Korean backgrounds aboard 500 to 900 ships, hastily built, many flat-bottomed, ill-suited for the open sea. Their destination was Hakata Bay on the northern coast of Kyushu. As they crossed the Korea Strait in November, they made brutal stops, first Tsushima, then Iki Island, slaughtering defenders and sending a grim message ahead of them. The Japanese, warned by signs of Mongol aggression, had spent months building defensive walls along Hakata Bay. Still, the invading army landed swiftly. The samurai who met them fought in the style of their own tradition. Valorous individual duels, shouted names, ritualized combat. But the Mongols came as a coordinated machine. Their infantry moved in unison. They fired arrows in waves. They used thunder crash bombs, early gunpowder weapons that exploded with sound and fire. Horses panicked. Samurai formations broke. The Japanese defenders, outmatched in technique but hardened in spirit, fought desperately into the dusk. That night, the Mongols returned to their ships. Perhaps it was uncertainty. Perhaps it was caution. The decision would cost them. As darkness fell, the weather began to turn. Clouds thickened. The wind rose. What followed is now etched into Japan's national memory. A violent storm, likely a typhoon, slammed into the fleet. Ships that had no business being on open water were torn apart. Thousands of soldiers were swept into the sea. Some drowned in their armor. Others were dashed against unfamiliar shores. The survivors, whatever remained of them, limped back to Korea. The attempted conquest of Japan had failed, and the Japanese named the wind that had saved them Kamikaze, the divine wind. 7 years had passed since the first Mongol fleet vanished into the sea. Along the rocky shores of Kyushu, the memory of their arrival lingered like the salt air, sharp, uncertain, and impossible to forget. The Japanese defenders, though battered, had survived, and the storm that had come in the night, tearing through the invaders' ships, was remembered not as chance, but as blessing. A divine wind, Kamikaze. In the months that followed the 1274 invasion, the Kamakura shogunate took no comfort in the sea's protection. They saw the Mongols not as defeated, but as delayed. Coastal towns were ordered to reinforce their defenses. A stone wall, over 2 meters high and stretching for miles, was constructed along Hakata Bay, where the invaders had first landed. Watchtowers were built. Messengers and scouts became part of the daily rhythm. Farmers tilled their fields in the shadow of the wall, their ears tuned to rumors blowing in from the west. At court, the Hoyo regents prepared for what they believed was inevitable. The costs of readiness were high, mobilizing warriors, storing supplies, and maintaining coastal garrisons, but the alternative was worse. Even in years of relative calm, The samurai remained under arms. Peace became a posture of endurance. Across the sea, Kublai Khan was not idle. The first invasion had failed to impress Japan into submission. Now, he prepared a second campaign, not a warning, but a conquest. In 1281, he ordered two vast invasion forces to converge on Japan. The Eastern Route Army, sailing from Korea, and the Southern Route Army, departing from southern China. The Eastern force, around 40,000 men on approximately 900 ships, launched first. The Southern force, larger still, struggled with delays and logistical strain, assembling thousands of ships and more than 100,000 troops from across China. Shipbuilders in both regions worked under immense pressure. Many vessels were flat-bottomed, built for rivers, not ocean. Still, the orders were clear. In Japan, scouts along the western shores began to report unusual movements. Fishermen returned with tales of strange silhouettes along the Korean coast, and southern monks recorded disturbances in the trade winds. The shogunate responded with quiet urgency. Supplies were redistributed. Warriors were summoned again to Kyushu. And by summer, a thick tension had settled over the coastline, a silence that did not comfort, but warned. No one knew exactly when the invaders would land, but everyone could feel it. The wind was shifting. The sea was watching. In mid-June of 1281, the first wave of Kublai Khan's invasion force arrived at Hakata Bay. Known as the Eastern Route Army, this fleet carried around 40,000 troops aboard approximately 900 ships. These were seasoned soldiers, Mongols, Koreans, and Chinese returning to a coastline they had once briefly claimed. But this time, the shoreline had changed. The Japanese defenders were ready. A stone wall now traced the edge of the bay, over 2 meters high, reinforced with watchtowers and defensive stations. Archers waited in formation. Samurai stood in ranks. The Eastern Fleet attempted several landings, but each time they were repelled by coordinated counterattacks. Unlike the fragmented duels of 1274, this defense was unified. Arrows flew in disciplined volleys. Blades met the surf, and the wall held. Unable to break through, the Mongol ships withdrew and anchored offshore. There, in the sweltering heat of summer, they waited. Kublai Khan's larger southern route army, over 100,000 troops on thousands of ships, was still delayed in southern China. The Mongols at Hakata Bay found themselves isolated and vulnerable. As days turned to weeks, the Japanese defenders did not relent. Under cover of night, small bands of samurai rode quietly across the water, boarding enemy ships in surprise attacks. Fires were set, supplies were stolen, and chaos spread among the anchored fleet. These raids were swift, personal, and relentless. Even in their sleep, the invaders were under threat. Morale faltered. Provisions, already limited, began to spoil. Disease crept through the crowded ships, carried on damp air and stagnant water. Wounds went untreated. Tempers flared. What discipline remained aboard the fleet slowly frayed. The Eastern Route Army had not been defeated in battle, but they were being worn down by time, by tactics, and by the sea itself. It wasn't until August that the Southern Fleet finally appeared. After weeks of delays and difficult seas, they emerged in force and joined the remnants of the Eastern Fleet off Jeju's coast. The full weight of Kublai Khan's invasion plan had finally assembled, but the waiting had taken its toll. And the sea, quiet for too long, was about to speak again. By mid-August of 1281, the waters off Kyushu were filled with the largest invasion force Japan had ever faced. The Eastern Route Army, already fraying from weeks of failed landings and nightly ambushes, had been joined at last by the Southern Route Army. In total, contemporary sources claimed the combined fleet numbered over 4,000 ships and carried as many as 140,000 troops. While modern historians treat these figures as upper estimates, The scale was undeniably immense, larger than anything the Mongol Empire had launched before. But size did not guarantee victory. The two fleets, launched separately from Korea and southern China, had failed to coordinate effectively. The Southern Route Army arrived late, after weeks of rough seas and logistical setbacks. Many of its ships had been rushed into service, riverboats with flat hulls, unfit for open water. On board were soldiers of various languages, ranks, and commands, few of whom shared a unified strategy. The once feared Mongol military machine, so effective on land, found itself disjointed and adrift. Meanwhile, the Japanese remained steadfast. Reinforced stone walls protected Hakata Bay, and samurai continued their nighttime raids, slipping between ships and small boats to attack, burn, and sabotage. With no harbor secured, the Mongol fleet lingered offshore, waiting, exposed, and increasingly strained by hunger and disease. Then, on August 15th, the sky darkened. A typhoon swept in from the south, sudden and severe. For 2 days, the winds howled and waves rose. Ships, packed tightly together, were tossed like driftwood. Masts snapped, hulls cracked, and vessels collided. Fire broke out aboard several ships. Oil lamps spilled across decks, igniting whatever they touched. Soldiers clad in heavy armor drowned quickly. Others clung to wreckage or were dashed against the rocks. The sea showed no mercy. When the storm passed, it left behind a trail of devastation. The coastline was littered with debris, shattered planks, scorched sails, bodies. Only a small fraction of the Mongol fleet survived. Some sources suggest that out of thousands of ships, just a few hundred remained intact. Most of the troops never reached land. Those who did were captured or killed in the days that followed. Kublai Khan, upon hearing the outcome, reportedly began planning another invasion, but it never materialized. The cost in lives, ships, and resources had been catastrophic. The psychological blow even greater. The Japanese would later call the storm kamikaze, the divine wind, believing it had saved them from foreign conquest. In truth, the victory had not belonged to a storm alone. It had been forged in walls, in raids, in weeks of relentless resistance. But in the end, the sea had delivered the final blow. In the wake of the storm, the beaches of Kyushu were littered with splintered hulls and scattered weapons. Thousands of Mongol soldiers had drowned, but some lived. From broken ships and drifting debris, survivors pulled themselves ashore soaked, wounded, and disoriented. The Japanese defenders wasted no time. Patrols fanned out across the coast, rounding up the survivors. These were not seen as prisoners of war, but as invaders who had already been given one warning, back in 1274. Now there would be no leniency. Mongols, Chinese, and Koreans all were gathered, questioned, and judged swiftly. Many were executed on the beaches. A few, especially skilled craftsmen and shipbuilders, were spared to serve local needs. Their names, if ever recorded, have not survived. Not all among the survivors were warriors. Shipbuilders, cooks, laborers, non-combatants who had traveled with the fleet were swept up in the disaster. For them, survival meant enslavement. The sea had stranded them in a land that viewed them with suspicion and fear, and there would be no return journey. The shogunate refused to negotiate their release, fearing any compromise might invite another invasion. Some legends, passed down in quiet mountain villages, speak of strange foreigners who appeared in the years that followed. Men who spoke no Japanese, who worked in silence, and eventually disappeared into the rhythms of rural life. These tales suggest a few survivors may have escaped capture and lived out their days in hiding, but no official record confirms this. Whether fact or folklore, the story remains part of the invasion's long shadow. Most survivors, however, met more certain ends cut down by sword, worked to death, or forgotten in isolation. They came with the greatest fleet the world had seen. But they left no mark, no legacy. Just bones beneath the soil and the faint memory of those who never went home. In the imperial halls of Dadu, news of the second failed invasion of Japan arrived slowly, muffled by distance and fear. Reports from the southern coast were incomplete and filled with cautious language. The fleet had been struck by a storm, they said. Many ships were lost. Tens of thousands were unaccounted for. Few messengers dared speak plainly to Kublai Khan, the aging but still formidable ruler of the Yuan dynasty, who had staked his legacy on subduing the island across the sea. Kublai was in his mid-60s, still commanding the largest empire on earth, and still unwilling to accept defeat. He ordered preparations for a third invasion almost immediately. Bureaucrats were mobilized. Shipwrights were pressed into service. Supplies were requisitioned, and officials dispatched to assess the damage and organize the next campaign. But reality pushed back. The costs of the last expedition had been staggering. Thousands of ships had been built and destroyed. Entire coastal regions had been stripped of resources. In Korea, the population was exhausted from forced labor and conscription. In southern China, resentment simmered over the grain and timber taken to fuel wars that yielded no gain. As the months passed, resistance to another campaign grew. Mongol commanders, once eager to expand the empire's reach, now hesitated. Chinese administrators complained of depleted treasuries. Even Kublai's inner circle, though careful not to defy him openly, began shifting focus elsewhere. Rebellions flared in Yunnan. Naval setbacks in Southeast Asia demanded new attention. The invasion of Japan slowly receded from the court's agenda, not with a proclamation, but with silence. Meanwhile, in Japan, the victory had taken on divine meaning. The typhoon had been named Kamikaze, the divine wind, a sign from the gods that Japan was to remain unconquered. That belief became a foundation of national pride and future military mythology. For Kublai, it was a ghost of unfinished conquest, too costly to pursue again. He lived another 13 years. He governed, expanded diplomacy, and waged other campaigns. But the subject of Japan never returned with urgency. The storm had not removed him from power, nor ruined the Yuan dynasty, but it had ended one part of his ambition. In the end, the sea did what armies could not. It forced the great Khan to turn away. Years passed, and the war-scarred shores of northern QC slowly returned to their rhythms. Fishing boats once again dotted the waters. Children chased crabs across the tidal flats. But the sea had not forgotten. Along quiet beaches and in the soft sands of coves, fragments of the past began to surface weathered planks, bent arrowheads, and shards of ceramic jars bearing unfamiliar patterns. Villagers occasionally unearthed relics from the lost invasion. Some were viewed with suspicion, others with fascination. Children stumbled upon broken sword hilts while digging for clams. Farmers turned up foreign coins while plowing the fields. With no formal archaeology in medieval Japan, most finds were left where they were. The remains became folded into local legends tales of cursed invaders, divine storms, and ghosts who walked the shore at night. In some places, families built shrines near where bones had washed ashore, honoring the nameless dead. Centuries later, the sea revealed its secrets more deliberately. Beginning in the early 1980s, near Takashima Island in Imari Bay, Japanese marine archaeologists began surveying the seabed. What they found astonished even the most skeptical scholars. Preserved beneath layers of silt were the remains of Yuan dynasty warships, wooden hulls still intact in places, iron anchors, stone ballast, and the unmistakable outlines of ancient tools and weapons. Further excavations through the 1990s and early 2000s uncovered Chinese ceramics, armor fragments, and fire-damaged beams, all consistent with the hasty, overcrowded ships described in historical records. The findings confirmed long-held theories. that the fleet had been built too quickly, packed too densely, and was ill-equipped for the storm that tore it apart. The typhoon may have been divine in Japanese memory, but these wrecks told a more human story, one of overreach, miscalculation, and vulnerability. Today, those artifacts are housed in museums, studied in universities, and still pulled occasionally from the seafloor. They are not just remnants of war. They are proof. The storm that once seemed like myth left behind a graveyard of timbers and iron, etched into the bed of the bay. What remained in the sand was not just wreckage. It was memory quiet, submerged, and slowly rising back into the light. By the early 14th century, the Mongol Empire was still the largest in the world, but cracks had begun to form. Kublai Khan's successors ruled over a vast Yuan dynasty in China that faced growing unrest. Natural disasters, burdensome taxation, and corruption in the bureaucracy eroded trust. While the dream of conquering Japan had been quietly abandoned, the broader lesson of military overreach had not been fully absorbed. The empire's focus shifted southward. Mongol forces launched major campaigns into Vietnam and Java. In Vietnam, the invasions of 1285 and 1287 to 1288 ended in stalemates and withdrawals, with the Vietnamese using guerrilla tactics, terrain, and attrition to their advantage. The Mongols failed to conquer the country outright, though Vietnam was later compelled to acknowledge Yang overlordship through tributary relations. In 1293, the Mongols invaded Java in response to an internal conflict in the island's eastern kingdom of Kadiri. The Yuan forces initially succeeded in battle, but were ultimately betrayed by their local allies from the Majapahit faction. With their position weakened and supply lines overextended, the Mongols withdrew from the island, their ambitions in Southeast Asia once again frustrated. In all these ventures, the same pattern repeated. Large, hastily organized fleets sent to distant, unfamiliar lands, struggling against logistics, climate, and resilient local defenders. The mistakes of the Japanese campaigns echoed in Vietnam and Java, but the imperial court pressed on, unwilling to acknowledge its limits. In Japan, however, the memory of the Mongol threat lingered. The warriors who defended the shores became celebrated, and the story of the divine wind that saved the islands from conquest was elevated into national myth. These narratives helped solidify the authority of the samurai class and the Kamakura shogunate, reinforcing a military structure that would shape Japan's future governance. Back in China, the strain of repeated failures took a heavier toll. Resources had been poured into foreign wars with little to show for it. Local officials grew disillusioned, and the empire's legitimacy began to fade. By the mid-14th century, discontent erupted in the Red Turban Rebellion, a populist uprising that combined religious fervor with economic desperation. It marked the beginning of the end for Mongol rule in China. Historians today see the failed invasions of Japan, Vietnam, and Java not only as military defeats, but as symptoms of a deeper issue. The Mongol Empire had expanded faster than it could sustain. Its fleets were ambitious but flawed, its leadership bold but overconfident. The storm that crushed the invasion of Japan was not the end, but it was the start of a long unraveling. Of the thousands of warships that were caught in the typhoon of 1281, only a handful survived. Some drifted back toward the Chinese coast, crippled and leaking. Others washed ashore along the rugged coastline of Kyushu. Most were broken wrecks. But according to local folklore, at least one small vessel came in whole battered, but upright, carrying a few stunned and silent men. In the decades that followed the invasion, oral traditions in parts of northern Kyushu began to circulate strange accounts. One story tells of a ghostly foreign ship that appeared in a quiet inlet days after the storm. Its mast was splintered, its sails torn to ribbons, and its crew nearly dead. A few soldiers, barely alive, staggered ashore before collapsing. The villagers who found them were unsure what to make of these castaways. Some feared them, others pitied them. In one version of the tale, the local headman, either out of mercy or curiosity, took them in, offering food and shelter. One man died soon after, the story says, but the others slowly regained strength. Unable to speak the language, and with no way to return home, they stayed. No written records confirm these details. But local legends persist. Speaking of the foreign men who never left, soldiers from the Mongol invasion who assumed Japanese names, took up fishing or farming, and became part of the community. Over time, their story blurred with myth. They were remembered not as enemies, but as strangers who adapted and disappeared into the rhythm of rural life. Historians remain cautious. While the scale of the invasion makes it likely that a few survivors did reach shore, there is no conclusive evidence of their integration. Still, the tale remains one of the more enduring folk memories of the Mongol invasions. In a war remembered mostly for destruction and loss, this quiet story of survival endures not in official chronicles, but in the voices of villagers who passed it down. Even if the ship never truly came ashore, the legend did. And sometimes that is what history remembers. Of the tens of thousands sent to conquer Japan in 1281, only a scattered few made it home. Their return was quiet. There were no parades, no ceremonies. The Yuan court recorded no celebrations, no speeches of triumph. Instead, the survivors, some wounded, many sick, trickled back into ports in southern China and Korea, carrying nothing but the memory of wind, salt, and loss. These were the men who had endured the typhoon, clung to broken timbers, and drifted on open sea for days. Many were Korean conscript shipbuilders, sailors, and soldiers forced into service. Those who survived returned to find their villages changed, families grieving, and farmland abandoned. They were not hailed as heroes. They simply resumed life where it had paused, often in silence. In the Yuan administration, the response was muted. The failure of the invasion had embarrassed the court, constrained imperial resources. Kublai Khan had poured enormous sums into building a vast fleet, training thousands of new recruits, and preparing for conquest. The campaign's collapse was explained in official documents as an act of nature, the will of heaven, manifest in the great storm. But privately, many understood that the fleet had not been ready. Its ships were hastily constructed. Its organization rushed. The storm had only finished what poor planning had begun. Some returning troops were absorbed into local garrisons, assigned to new posts on China's southern frontier. Others likely faded from the records entirely. For most, there were no monuments, no rewards. No written honors marked their survival. Only the absence of their names from casualty rolls suggests they made it back. Even in defeat, the empire remained vast. But the limits of its reach had been made clear. There would be no third invasion of Japan. The dreams of extending Mongol rule across the sea were quietly set aside. Kublai Khan, once eager to rule over all islands and shores beyond China, turned his focus elsewhere. For the survivors, the memory lingered. Some must have told their children about the voyage, the ships torn apart, the men lost to wind and waves. They had lived through an epic failure, one of the largest naval disasters in history. But history, as it often does, moved on quickly. Their names faded. Their voices were not recorded. And yet, for a brief moment, they had stood on the edge of an empire's ambition. Then they returned quietly to a world already trying to forget the storm. The Mongol invasions of Japan ended not in conquest, but in quiet ruin. Twice, the armies of Kublai Khan had crossed the sea under banners of imperial certainty. And twice, they had been undone by the resolve of Japanese defenders and by the forces of nature itself. The second invasion, in 1281, collapsed in one of the largest maritime disasters in history. What remained was silence. The empire did not speak of it, No ballads were sung. The sea simply kept what it had taken. For centuries, the true scale of the disaster was remembered only in Japan's legends. Stories of the kamikaze, the divine winds that protected the islands, were passed from generation to generation. But what lay beneath the waves was lost until 1980, when divers off the coast of Takashima in Imari Bay discovered something remarkable. Beneath layers of silt and sand, researchers uncovered a bronze seal bearing the name of a Mongol general. It was the first clear sign that the invasion's remains had not vanished, only sunken. In the decades that followed, underwater excavations revealed parts of ships, iron anchors, arrowheads, swords, and even ceramic explosive bombs. Each fragment told a piece of a forgotten story. These artifacts showed not only the vast scale of the fleet, but also how hastily many vessels had been constructed, unfit for the open sea and overwhelmed by the storm. Occasionally, human remains were found too. A skull here, a bone fragment there, mute evidence of the soldiers who never returned. They were not buried with ceremony. They remained where the waves had taken them, unknown and unclaimed. Historians now know that Japan's defense was not due to divine wind alone. Coordinated samurai resistance, night raids, and coastal fortifications played a crucial role. But the typhoon dealt the final blow, scattering ships and lives across the bay. The failure marked a turning point. Kublai Khan never launched a third invasion. The Mongol Empire had reached the edge of its limits, and Japan remained unconquered. Today, the wrecks near Takashima are recognized as Japan's first official underwater historic site. The sea that once took thousands now gives back their story slowly, piece by piece. The Mongols who didn't make it left behind no names, no legacies. But in their silent remains, their lost weapons, and the wood of their shattered ships, they left something else. A reminder of the limits of conquest. A testament to the sea's indifference. And a quiet final chapter to an empire that once believed it could rule the wind. On the morning of April 21st, 1701, the stillness of Edo Castle was pierced by an act no samurai was permitted to commit. Lord Asano Naganori of the Echo domain, a young daimyo with little experience in courtly life, was attending to his official duties at the shogunate's grand seat of power. His assignment was ceremonial, to help receive envoys from the imperial court in Kyoto, a task as prestigious as it was fraught with unspoken expectations. Guiding him through these formalities was Kira Yoshinaka, a senior shogunate official tasked with instructing regional lords in the complex rites of the capital. Kira was influential and proud, and by many accounts, he resented Asano. It is said that Asano refused to offer bribes or flattery, a breach of the quiet courtesies that greased the machinery of the court. In turn, Kira is believed to have insulted him, calling him a country lord, an offense that cut deeply. Their conflict simmered for days. Then, in the great corridor of pines, known as the Matsu no Roka, Asano's restraint snapped. He drew his wakizashi, the shorter of the two swords worn by a samurai, and struck Kira across the face. A second blow missed, cutting into a wooden pillar. Blood was drawn. It was enough. To draw a weapon inside Edo Castle was a capital crime. The fact that Kira survived did not matter. Within hours, the shogunate issued its judgment. Asano was to die by his own hand. That very afternoon, he was taken to a quiet chamber and ordered to commit seppuku. Alone, without ceremony or defense, he composed himself, prepared as tradition required, and died. His lands were confiscated. His family name was erased from official records. His retainers, over 300 loyal samurai, were dismissed, now masterless. In one stroke, a clan was destroyed. But among those now scattered men, the spirit of duty had not been extinguished. In the shadows of shame, a different kind of loyalty began to take root. In the days that followed Lord Asano's death, the samurai of Aka were dismissed from service. Their castle was surrendered to the shogunate. Their stipends vanished. And just like that, over 300 loyal retainers became Rōnin masterless men. Their status reduced, their futures uncertain. The laws of the Tokugawa shogunate were clear and strict. Vengeance, no matter how righteous, was forbidden. The power of the state could not be challenged. If any of Asano's former retainers acted against Kira, it would be seen not as justice, but as rebellion. Still, the sting of injustice lingered. Kira Yoshinaka had survived. Though scarred, he remained protected by powerful allies. He resumed his life, untouched by the punishment that had befallen their lord. The men of Akoi watched, powerless and scattered. Yet among them, one voice stood out. Jishi Kuranosuke, Asano's chief retainer, believed that revenge had to be taken, but only at the right time. An open strike would fail. So he urged the Rōnin to separate, to live quietly, to hide their intentions. In doing so, they could lull their enemies into complacency. And so they did. The former retainers scattered across the country. Some became merchants. Others worked as guards or took on humble trades. A few even married into distant households, their swords hidden away. From the outside, it looked as if they had accepted disgrace. Jishi himself moved to Kyoto. There, he adopted the life of a dissolute man. He drank heavily in tea-houses, frequented the pleasure quarters, and allowed rumors of his ruin to spread. He was watched closely by spies sent to monitor any sign of conspiracy. They reported that Jishi had fallen into vice and shame. He was no longer a threat, but it was all a careful deception. For nearly 15 months, the Rōnin waited. They endured hardship, humiliation, and uncertainty, not because they had forgotten their duty, but because they remembered it too well. They had not sworn vengeance in haste. They were planning something far more enduring. In public, they were wanderers and laborers. In private, they were still samurai bound by honor to a fallen master, waiting for the moment when the sword could be drawn once more. For nearly 14 months, the Rōnin of Akko lived apart. Some returned to distant provinces. Others took on modest work in unfamiliar cities. Their lives appeared scattered and quiet, their mission forgotten. But this separation was not surrender. It was strategy. Kira Yoshinaka remained cautious at first. He increased the guards around his estate. He kept watch for any sign of vengeance. But as the months passed without incident, his fears dulled. The Rōnin, it seemed, had truly dissolved. Even the government relaxed its scrutiny. The danger, they assumed, had passed. Meanwhile, in Kyoto, Jishi Kuranosuke maintained his performance. He drank in tea-houses, frequented the pleasure districts, and allowed himself to be seen in disreputable company. To outsiders and spies, he looked like a man ruined by disgrace. But privately, he remained focused. Letters passed in secret. Quiet meetings were held. Plans began to take shape. Each of the 47 men who joined the cause was chosen with care. They were not simply loyal, they were willing to die. This was not a quest for wealth or title. There would be no reward, only a final act of honor. When called upon, they left behind families, futures, and names. They became shadows once more. By autumn of 1702, the Rōnin began gathering in Edo. One by one, they returned in disguise. Some posed as merchants or tradesmen. Others worked as guards or builders. They rented homes near Kira's estate and studied its defenses. They observed guard routines, noted weak points, and prepared weapons in secret. Everything was done quietly, with patience and precision. Kira, believing himself safe, relaxed his vigilance. His household staff grew complacent. His guard detail was reduced. He celebrated the new year without fear. And then, As January 1703 drew to a close and snow fell softly over the rooftops of Edo, the 47 Rōnin prepared to strike. On the night of January 30th, 1703, the streets of Edo were quiet. Lanterns glowed faintly along narrow alleys, and the air was still. From the shadows emerged two small groups of men, moving with quiet purpose. These were the 47 Rōnin, led by Jishi Kuramasuke. After 14 months of preparation, their moment had arrived. The men split into two teams, one approaching the main gate of Kira Yoshinaka's estate, the other circling toward the rear. They carried weapons concealed beneath dark robes. Some were disguised as tradesmen. Others posed as laborers. They had studied this mansion for months. Now each man knew his task. Before the attack, they knocked on doors of neighboring homes, urging people to stay inside and remain calm. This was not a riot or a robbery. It was a mission of justice. Drums and whistles were used to coordinate their movements, and the assault began swiftly. Inside the estate, Kira's household was caught off guard. The guards fought back, but they were fewer in number than in earlier months. The Rōnin moved with discipline and care, avoiding harm to women and children, striking only those who resisted. Kira himself could not be found at first. Panic spread through the house. Then, in a storage building behind the main hall, a Rōnin pulled back a bundle of straw and found him shaking and silent, hiding in fear. He was brought before Jishi, who bowed formally. In keeping with the code of the samurai, Jishi offered Kira the chance to end his own life by seppuku. A dagger was placed before him, the same one Lord Asano had used to die with honor. But Kira could not bring himself to act. He remained silent. Jishi nodded, and the task was given to another. With one stroke, Kira Yoshinaka was beheaded. The Rōnin carefully wrapped the head and carried it through the quiet streets to Sengakuji Temple, where Lord Asano's grave stood. There, in the early hours of morning, they washed the head, laid it before the tomb, and knelt in silent tribute. They had done what the law forbade, but what their code demanded. And then, without protest or flight, they turned themselves in to await the judgment of the shogunate. By the following morning, word of the Rōnin's attack had rippled across Edo. Officials arrived at Sengakuji Temple, where they found all 47 men waiting in silence. At the foot of Lord Asano's grave lay the severed head of Kira Yoshinaka, carefully cleaned and placed with reverence. Among the people of Edo, the reaction was electric. Some viewed the men as criminals. Others saw them as the very image of Bushido loyalty, carried out to its final, absolute expression. Though their actions defied the law, many admired their restraint, their discipline, and the symbolism of their act. For the Tokugawa shogunate, the decision was not simple. The Rōnin had violated direct orders by taking revenge without permission, but executing them like common criminals risked public outrage. They had not killed for gain. They had acted with a seriousness that was hard to dismiss. The men were placed under house arrest, divided between 4 daimyo households in Edo. For several weeks, the government debated. And then, on March 20th, 1703, the verdict was delivered. The shogunate acknowledged their loyalty, but upheld the law. The Rōnin would die by seppuku. The sentence was accepted without protest. Each of the 46 remaining men performed the ritual in accordance with the samurai tradition. Their deaths were solemn and orderly. No resistance, no outcry, just quiet resolve. The youngest among them, Terasaka Kichiman, was spared. His youth, and possibly his role as a messenger rather than a fighter, earned him a pardon. He would live in exile, away from Edo. After the seppuku, the bodies of the Rōnin were brought to Sengakuji Temple and buried beside their master, Lord Asano. The graves were marked with stone. Over time, people from all walks of life came to bow their heads and offer incense. The story was complete. But the legend was just beginning. The graves at Sengakuji Temple became more than burial sites. They became symbols. In the weeks and months after the Rōnin were laid to rest, visitors began arriving quietly, respectfully, sometimes tearfully. Some offered incense. Others left coins or folded poems tucked into the stone. The story of the 47 had begun to root itself in the public imagination. As the tale spread, it became something more than news. It evolved into a legend, retold in ballads, kabuki plays, puppet theater, and illustrated scrolls. By the mid-18th century, the dramatized version, Sheshin Dora, had already taken hold as a national classic. It reached farmers and nobles alike, and each new version gave the story more weight, more symbolism. Even the shogunate, which had officially condemned the act as illegal, had allowed the men to die by seppuku and be buried as samurai. That decision punishment with honor spoke to the complexity of their deed. It was a statement that loyalty was valued, but law still ruled. But admiration was never universal. Confucian scholars and officials debated the message. Some called the Rōnin reckless. They had defied direct authority, risked disorder, and committed murder. Others saw them as righteous men of deep conviction, who had acted not for reward, but for justice. The legacy was fiercely contested. Still, the people chose remembrance. Parents brought children to Sengakuji to whisper the story beside the graves. Travelers bowed before the stones. Artists painted scenes of their final stand. And over time, the Rōnin became something larger than themselves, not only warriors, but ideals made human. They were remembered not because they were perfect, but because they had made a costly choice and stood by it. In a world where obedience and honor often conflicted, they had shown what it meant to bear the full weight of both. More than 3 centuries have passed since the Rōnin last walked. The winter streets of Edo, the city is now Tokyo. The quiet lanes where they moved under cover of night have become avenues of neon and glass. But at Sengakuji Temple, their names still rest beneath aged stone. And every December 14th, people continue to gather hundreds, sometimes thousands, bringing incense, offerings, and quiet thoughts. The aka Gishisai, the festival of loyal retainers, honors not only the act of revenge, but the ideals that surrounded it. Visitors light candles, lay white flowers, and read aloud the names of each man. Some dress in traditional attire. Others walk the path the Rōnin once took. On rare occasions, snow falls as the ceremony begins, evoking the memory of that long-ago winter night in 1703. The world that the Rōnin knew is long gone, but their story endures retold in books, films, and plays, studied in classrooms and whispered among temple visitors. It has been translated, debated, and commemorated. For some, it remains a symbol of loyalty. For others, a cautionary tale of defiance. But above all, it is deeply human, a story of grief, duty, and resolve. They were not martyrs or mythic figures. They were men who chose a path few would dare to follow, and they walked it to the end. That choice, deliberate and final, continues to echo in the quiet spaces of memory. And so the temple remains quiet, solemn, and tucked into the fabric of a modern city, where wind stirs the trees, incense drifts through cold air, and 47 graves remain in a row, still loyal, still remembered.